Howdy folks, this is CowTipper Vern again. Leaving an extreme, high-control religious group involves deconstructing how you view many topics. It involves reassessing them, redefining them in a healthier way, and then reclaiming them. Today I'm going to talk about behavior control. Some of you may already be ahead of me and realize why I've done this series the way I have, with emotion control, thought control, information control, and behavior control, and then how to reclaim all of those, or the process of reclaiming all of them anyway. You may recognize these as the components of Dr. Stephen Hassan's BITE model, and I'll talk about that a little more at the end. But I did these all together on purpose as a series, and I released them the way I did, so they all kind of go together. This is all loosely based on Dr. Hassan's model. I believe that behavior is downstream of information control, thought control, and emotion control. Because I believe if you can control all those three things, you will control behavior from then on out. If you've taught someone to disconnect themselves from their emotions and given them synthetic emotions instead, if you've controlled their thoughts and taught them to turn against their own thoughts and not allow themselves to think freely, and then you've controlled the information that they intake and learn about, their behavior will fall right into line. That's my thought anyway. I believe behavior is downstream of those other things. 2x2 culture controls everything, mostly through peer pressure, and really mostly through worker pressure. But the fact that workers are sent from God and speak for God means that they have the most pressure of all, so the peer pressure comes along after that pretty easily. Every single thing that I've talked about, they would frame as good versus evil. There's good versus evil emotions, there's good versus evil thoughts, there's good information and bad information that would take you away from the way, and there's good versus evil behaviors. And really, the behaviors are how you tell if somebody's good or evil. They don't always say evil. Usually they just say worldly. Evil's very hard to define, but if you can define yourself as in opposition to everything around you, and by everything around you, I mean worldly, then behavior is very easy to control. It's a very passive way of leading people. And what I'm going to talk about a little today is how people will allow themselves to be controlled and then say that they're not being controlled, say that actually they want to do this, they want to live this way, they want to act this way. Because you've controlled every other part of their life, the behavior just falls right into line, and the people are convinced that that's what they want. If you've controlled their emotions, their thoughts, and controlled everything they read, they'll act just right. And this is how the 2x2 culture is self-perpetuating. When all four of these components of our lives are controlled overtly, and sometimes not overtly, sometimes very sneakily, sometimes very subversively, then we'll continue to do it. We'll continue to act this way all on our own, and even reinforce it to other people, as if we're the ones that thought it up. We'll show that conviction as if it came from somewhere else. A lot of times we'll say it came from God, or we'll throw in words like the Spirit and stuff like that. Things that are very difficult to talk about because they're not as tangible as a worker standing up there on a platform. But once you've been taught that you don't own all of those aspects of your life, then you'll just fall into line and do exactly what you're supposed to do. And no one even has to tell you. That's very much how I was. The end of this series is going to be talking about how to reclaim behavior, and once you reclaim it, what you can do with it, how you can interact better with the world. This is all just based on my own experience, and like I say, this is all loosely based on the BITE model by Stephen Hassan. I'll talk more about that at the end. You will always be told that actions are good and actions are evil, and there's no good reason not to do these things. You'll always be told that the good people doing the good things, acting the good way, those are God's people. And by good, I just mean professing, following the workers, doing what the workers say. And everyone else who isn't is bad in some way. They're worldly, they're evil, whatever word you want to put with it. But there's no good reason whatsoever to not do what the workers say. Everything is framed that way. When I was younger, I always knew when my friends were losing out. The verbiage used on the inside is something like, oh, they have a bad spirit. They're struggling right now, something like that. In worldly churches, all the other churches, they would say something like they're backsliding or they're falling away, something like that. And I realized that I didn't actually always know why that was. I didn't know exactly what was cluing me in. What I realize now is that what I was noticing is that my professing friends who were struggling were only doing one thing wrong. It didn't matter what that one thing was. I just knew that They were doing something that wasn't perfect, and therefore they were falling away. If there was one behavior that wasn't stereotypically professing, it meant that everything else underneath, the information they were reading, the emotions they were allowing themselves to have and experience, the thoughts that were being nurtured by those things, something was wrong there. I didn't always articulate it that way, but I could always tell when somebody was struggling because one thing wasn't quite right. The thing is, with high-pressure groups, you just break one strand and the whole thing falls. And I think that people who are in meetings don't realize that people who've left meetings go through that. They don't realize how quickly everything falls when it doesn't all hold up. Insert story of building house on rock or sand or whatever. But the behaviors I'm talking about today are the outward display that everything else is right, that your emotions are right, that your thoughts are right, and that you're not reading the wrong things. By right, of course, I just mean professing. By right, I'm doing finger quotes in the air. I just mean whatever a worker has said is okay. I'm going to talk about behavior in two different ways today. First, I'm going to talk about expected behaviors, behaviors that are explicitly taught by the workers, that are enforced, that are essentially part of doctrine, even though, as I mentioned before, there's no real written doctrine anywhere. These behaviors aren't from the Bible, unless as I go, I think maybe they are. I'll try to note them as I go. These behaviors are all preached by the workers and enforced by the workers and then enforced by the friends on the workers' behalf. They vary from place to place, but wherever you live, they are expected of you. And they're demonstrations that you're in, quote unquote. You're in the fold. You're one of God's people. You're professing if you do these things. That's the first category. The second category I'm going to talk about is behaviors that are sort of inherent. They're not explicitly preached or taught. No one says you have to do them, but you just end up doing them. They're things that you just kind of do, and when you stop doing them, people get the idea that you might be losing out. And maybe they're right. I'm organizing them this way because the expected behaviors are really the B in the BITE model. And the inherent implicit behaviors are sort of the results of the rest of the BITE model, the ITE. So I'll start with the explicit ones first. I'll start with the behaviors that are demanded. Okay, so first I'm going to talk about all the rules that have to be followed in order to behave correctly. These are the expected behaviors, expected explicitly, preached about on the platform, reinforced in testimonies, and interpreted as convictions by everybody in meetings. Everything I talk about here is going to have one of two reactions depending on if you're in meetings or not. If you're not in meetings, you'll say, oh, yeah, that was a rule. I had to do that. If you're in meetings, if you're still professing, you'll say, those aren't rules. Those are just things we do for unity. Those are just things, we like to do those things. I like to actually do them. I prefer that. That's what you'll say out loud. I don't know what you're saying in your head, but out loud, 2x2s always talk about loving to follow the rules. They don't call them rules. They also don't call themselves 2x2s, but that's neither here nor there for right now. But their behavior mimics others' behavior around them very closely because that's how they interpret being righteous. Mind you, the behavior changes place to place. The rules they follow are different depending on where you live in the world, but they don't like to talk about that. Okay, so first off is proper dress. 2x2s have to dress the way they do. And in this case, when I say 2x2s, I just mean the women. The guys don't have to do anything. The women have to dress a certain way. They have to wear dresses or skirts, no pants. That is not negotiable. And I've heard a lot of people saying lately that maybe that'll be negotiable, that maybe they'll try to wear pants to meetings and see how that goes. The fact that it's such a gigantic deal shows how much of a rule it is. I've heard so many professing women say that they prefer this. It's more comfortable for them. This is how they like to present to the world. And that's fine if they believe that. The second women leave meetings, they throw this away completely. So that tells you something. A lot of women were so forced to wear dresses when they were younger that when they leave meetings, they get rid of all of them, get rid of all of their skirts, all of their dresses, because it was such a grievous rule. When you're going to school and you're made to wear dresses and skirts to play sports in your physical education classes, or you're not allowed to play sports as an extracurricular activity because you can't wear a skirt, that's a rule. They're not choosing that, ever. Another rule about women's dress is no jewelry or no makeup. This one gets bent quite a bit. There's lots of ways that women get around this. Certain jewelry is okay, certain jewelry isn't okay. But the hair has to be exactly right. The hair has to be on top of the head in a bun, typically not dyed or colored either. People have derisively called 2x2s the buns and skirts people for a reason, because they all dress like that. And once again, they will tell you that they want to, and then they will admit they don't. One of the things that really changed how I viewed this as I was leaving meetings was I saw a message board online one time that was primarily professing people, and somebody came to the message board and asked this question. They said, "Hey, I'm somewhat new to meetings, and I'm bringing a friend, and my friend is saying, it seems strange that you all have to dress like this. Why would you dress like this? There's no reason to do that. It's not biblical." Of course, 2x2s think it is. That's okay. I was blown away by the responses. I remember just sitting and reading every single response. Not one time did somebody respond and say that they enjoyed it. Sometimes in conversation they will. They'll say, "Oh no, I like to dress like this. I like to have hair like this." But given a moment to sit and type out their response, 0 people said that. 0 women said that that was preferable, that they chose to do it and they would anyway. Some of the comments were, "God wants me to do it." Others said, "Well, it doesn't bother me if women don't, but for unity, I'm going to do this for unity." "Well, the workers have asked us to, so that's why I do it." They were all reasons for why they had done it, why they would dress like this, none of which had anything to do with their choice. This is a perfect microcosm of how controlling everything around a person causes them to control themselves and then rationalize it. Especially rationalizing it with a nod to unity. We don't want to offend other people. We don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. We don't want to be a stumbling block to anybody. Trying to get people to not be stumbling blocks to each other is one of the best ways to get people to fall into line and stop thinking for themselves lest they hurt somebody else. That constant worry about offending other people is what keeps people from acting in their own best interest a lot of the time. It worked on me as well. I was very much that person growing up. So the women have all those restrictions. Guys have some restrictions, but not as much because, Protestant religion. Rules about how you look always affect women way more than they affect guys. And that topic has been so beaten to death that I'm not even going to go into it anymore. The reasons behind it are so obvious that it's almost silly to go into it. But one thing I want to note about it is how obviously the men are the ones that make those rules. Obviously. But in the 2x2s, there are brother and sister workers. There are men and women preaching from the platform. I don't ever remember a sister worker, preaching about how women should dress from the platform. I don't remember that ever happening. I'm sure it did happen, but I don't remember it. It was almost always at convention on, say, a Thursday or Friday afternoon, where some older brother had just had it up to here with all the people looking like they were happy and decided to start laying into the young people about how they dressed. And it was mostly about women having their hair long, uncut, on top of their heads, wearing long dresses and all that. None of this jewelry, none of these tattoos, all that, all those worldly things. See also evil. The guys are the only ones that ever talked about that. That's kind of interesting when you think about it. Considering how tightly the women stick to those rules, it's interesting that the women never actually talk about them. It's all top down. It's all from the brother workers. Men have a few things they have to abide by, but not really. They're not hard and fast rules. The tattoos one is real. Guys shouldn't have tattoos. And guys should have short hair, of course. Those are spoken about, especially the hair. If you grow your hair out long as a guy, you're going to get a talking to by a worker for sure. But the rest of it, guys can do pretty much whatever they want. I dress nice most of the time. On Sunday mornings, I would wear a necktie and, look real professing and religious and Protestant. But the rest of the time, I could kind of do whatever I want. And I was very aware of that when I was younger. I was very aware that I was lucky that I could kind of just blend in with the crowd. I didn't have to look weird. And I always felt bad for women, and I still do. Especially now knowing that so many of them really don't like that. But they do it anyway for unity. Of course, all of this is just to show that you have the Spirit or don't have the Spirit. No one explains exactly what the Spirit is. There's different ways you can look at it, and different workers, when you get into details, will have different versions of it. But in reality, it's just conformity. That's the main thing, is just to conform, just to stay in the middle of God's way. Don't go to the edge of it. Don't go to the edge. Get as close as possible. When you don't write anything down, but you hint at rules a lot, it creates a conservatism in the people because it doesn't give them anything to shoot for. It just tells them not to risk it. Don't go to the edge. Stay in the middle. Stay by the shepherd. That's preached a lot. So other than the obvious, really strict rules that they have, there's a general sense of don't even push it. Don't even risk it. Don't even trim your hair. Make sure your skirt's long enough. Don't wear anything that could be worldly. Don't wear anything that could tempt someone or something like that. When things aren't written down, people tend to take the most conservative possible approach to something to avoid risking it and to avoid being a stumbling block to other people. And that's why, for the most part, as people age within the 2x2s, they get more and more conservative, even in dress and talk and things like that. Some people test the rules a little bit when they're younger, but as they get older, they get more and more conservative. Obviously, you can't say bad words. You can't cuss. Bad language is not acceptable. Of course, there's a lot of inherent pressure about celebrating holidays correctly, not listening to TV or radio, not going to movies, stuff like that. Each of those rules is explicit and preached on, but preached differently in every area. Wherever you go on the globe, there's going to be a little bit different feeling about those things, and of course it's all God's word according to them. And it all shows the Spirit according to them, but it's not consistent. It's eye-opening to travel around and see how those rules change, even though they're strictly adhered to, and the most conservative interpretation of those rules is adhered to. The rules themselves change a little bit depending on where you go and depending on who the overseer is. For example, if you go to some parts of the world, they don't want you to wear denim. Guys can't wear denim. I think that's changed a lot. When I was younger, I remember an older brother worker, I think he was the overseer, speaking about men wearing shirts that had words on them, because if you wear the words, then that's who you are. It's what you become, something like that. I was a little kid when I heard it, and it didn't affect me very long. I went right back to wearing words on my shirts. Another thing they preach about explicitly is attendance to meetings. Meeting attendance is very important. Don't miss or you're not in anymore, period. If you miss a couple times because you work or because of school or something, they'll purse their lips and nod a little bit and say that they're glad you're there the next time, or tell you, oh, we missed you. We missed your part in the meeting. That's a passive-aggressive warning shot. It means that if you keep doing that, you're going to be out. And the workers will make sure of that. I've heard of people who've missed several meetings because of health issues, and the workers have met up with them and told them, you either need to get to meeting, find a way, or you're not professing anymore and you can't take part. I've heard that multiple times. It's bizarre, and it's frankly pretty abusive, but they speak for God, so who's going to question it? When you're in meeting, taking part is not optional. Once you've professed, you must take part. And once you've been baptized, you must take the emblems. Skipping those things, again, if you do it once or twice, you'll get a few cocked eyebrows and you might even get a visit from the workers. If you do it several times, that's a problem. You obviously have a problem with your spirit. Maybe you're worldly now, and the workers might shut you off. I know somebody who was struggling, they felt, for a while, and was having some troubles and some personal issues, and decided to take a few weeks and just listen to meeting, just listen to God speak. And this person was absolutely shamed by their family and the workers for doing so, and told that they'd better not even come if they're not going to speak in meetings. I think that's pretty common. I've heard stories like that, but I actually know somebody personally who that happened to. It was really shameful. It was meant to be shameful. It was meant to shame the person into conformity. That's all any of this is. You're expected to profess young. You're expected to get baptized as a young adult. And it's a little more passive than some of these rules, but it is expected. And if you don't do it, you'll get a talking to. A worker will pull you aside for a little visit. They like to have little visits. Little visits are rarely good. They're not fun. Another requirement is unquestioning support of the ministry. Both the support and the lack of questioning are important. If you don't support the ministry, you're not part of the friends. You're not professing and you don't count. If you question the ministry, you don't count. And you'll be asked to stop taking part. You'll be asked to give up a meeting if you have one. They'll take away any privileges you have. They'll take away fellowship that you have. They'll turn your family against you, explicitly. I know of workers who have gone from house to house and told people to turn on their own kids because the kids weren't acting right. Not encourage them, not talk to them. Of course not talk to them. Honest discourse is not happening in meetings. The workers have explained to them that the best thing to do is essentially excommunicate and shun their kids. Now, they don't have a formal practice of excommunication and shunning, but it happens. They do it, it's active, and they think it's right. Again, the main thing isn't to try to win the soul. The main thing is to avoid contamination of your own soul. Trusting and supporting the workers is always framed as humility. Their humility and also yours. They expect you to welcome them into your home and feed them and things like that. And that's all part of the system. I don't actually hold that part against them because it is part of the system. They don't have homes. But again, if you don't do that, if you refuse in any way, that's a problem. And they'll have a little visit with you. Another thing that's spoken about explicitly in meetings is keeping meetings above all things. Sometimes they'll phrase it like keeping God above all things or keeping the love of Christ above all things. But very often, it's interesting that they actually just say, keep the meetings in their place. Keep meetings above all. Don't neglect coming to meetings. That's really important to them, to not neglect the meetings. There's actually a verse that says something about not neglecting meeting together, and that's all they need. From then on, they can tell you, don't miss any meetings. Keep the meetings above your hobbies, above your job if possible, above school. All of those things come separately. It's really important. More and more, I think people are trying to reprioritize a little bit, but it's tough. And again, if you miss a couple times, it doesn't matter why you missed. What matters is that you missed. And that means your soul is struggling and you need to be scolded for it. It's spoken of explicitly from the platform that the most important thing is getting to meetings. Not necessarily even loving God, serving God, believing in Jesus, whatever. It's getting to meetings physically. That's what's important. So privilege meetings above all else, and also privilege professing people above all else. That's taught explicitly from the platform. Don't be unequally yoked with other people. I'll talk more about that in a second, as far as dating and stuff. But family, friends, your best friends, your closest family, put them aside if they don't encourage you to go to meetings. If you have anyone that's not falling into line, you need to separate yourself from them. That is taught explicitly. I've heard it many, many, many times over the course of my life. Put those people away that don't encourage you to follow the workers. If your family doesn't get into line, they're essentially dead to you. They don't exactly say it like that, but Jesus said he brought a sword and families will turn against each other. They love those verses. They use those verses whenever they can. If somebody's discouraging somebody from going to a meeting or encouraging questioning of doctrine, philosophy, or questioning the workers in any way, out come those verses about Jesus separating families. Unprofessing family is always treated worse than worldly people, always. When workers teach you to prioritize professing people, that's what happens. Speaking of professing relationships, it's often preached from the platform and taught by workers and reinforced by elders and others, even your friends and family, to avoid dating or marrying unprofessing people, worldly people. You don't want to be unequally yoked, quote unquote. Workers talk about this quite a bit. They talk to the young people often about being careful who they date. I took this really seriously when I was younger. I didn't even have a lot of unprofessing friends because I just knew I didn't want to be allowing that kind of influence into my life. And I absolutely never dated somebody who wasn't professing because I took that very literally. I knew that not only was it a bad idea for my soul, I'd be a bad example to my siblings and to other people. I'd be a bad example to the world of what a professing person does, that they compromise. We don't want to compromise. Workers are extremely unhappy when you don't marry a professing person. Whoever you marry, regardless of who it is, you're not allowed to divorce, and that's explicit in some areas, not all areas. The United States is known for its split from the East Coast and West Coast. The West Coast has an absolute policy about divorce and remarriage. Absolutely no divorce. And if you are divorced, absolutely no remarriage. And they will stop you from taking part in the meetings. They'll stop you from taking the emblems in meetings. On the East Coast, it's a little more nuanced. And I've never lived over there, but I hear that it has something to do with trying the spirits and giving little probationary periods and stuff like that. The reason why this one's such a damaging one and such a terrible way to control behavior is because it controls behavior into people making bad mistakes. Workers are very harsh on the dating world. And of course, no premarital sex, any of that stuff. Premarital sex is one of those topics that's so far outside of conversation that people don't talk about it at all. It's completely beyond the pale to talk about it. So it happens for a lot of people, but they don't want to talk about it. You just know that you've shamed everyone if you get caught doing something like that. So you have very sterile dating life, then you only marry a professing person. If that doesn't work out, that's just too bad. And essentially your salvation is in the balance if you do anything about it. Workers have often encouraged people to stay in abusive relationships, psychologically abusive, verbally abusive, even physically abusive. They've demanded people stay in those relationships and not get divorced because that's what's important, is staying in the relationship and supporting the ministry. They believe that God doesn't like divorce, so they're going to reinforce that by making sure no one ever does it. And if they do, punish them for it. It's explicit, it's taught, It's a very real thing. It's not implied in any way. It's very damaging to a lot of people. A lot of abuse happens because the workers demand that people don't avoid it. I could get into anecdotes all day about people having abusive relationships and having the workers side with the abuser just to maintain the relationship, just to keep an open home, things like that. Luckily, I never experienced anything like that myself, so it's just stories to me, luckily. So that's just a list of things that are explicitly taught and demanded by workers, demanded by the mouthpieces of God themselves, under penalty of excommunication, taken away of privileges, removal of fellowship of any kind, under shame, under whatever punishment they think they can get away with and still feel good about themselves. They make sure you do all of those things, all of the things I listed before. And that's not a complete list, by the way. But all the things I listed before are some of the most obvious things where there are hard, fast rules that the workers enforce. If you don't do these things, it is assumed you're not professing. There's no good reason to not do any of the things. Any of the things the workers demand of you are seen as reasonable because it's the workers demanding it. There's no good reason not to do it. And if you don't do these things, there's ready-made excuses for why you might not be doing it. Such as, in most cases, if marriage trouble is happening and one person's not coming to meeting, the one going to meeting will maintain all of the sympathy from the people in meetings because of this. If somebody goes to college and stops coming to meetings or misses a few meetings, it'll be because school made them liberal. School made them worldly. Worldly temptation just gets at us at all times. An unprofessing spouse pulled us away. An unprofessing friend pulled us away. A worldly person pulled us away. We don't have a lot of agency here, you'll notice. When in doubt, worldly temptation just took us over. They listened to the wrong sources. You'll hear that a lot, too. They listened to the wrong voices. If they'd listened to the good voices, like the workers, then they would still be here in meeting, but they listened to the wrong thing. And there they go. They lost their salvation. They left. By the way, nobody inside is ever completely sure of their salvation, but you're definitely sure that people who leave don't have it. That's interesting. And if you do any of this stuff, if you fall short in any of the explicitly stated things, it's because you have a bad spirit. The world got to you, the devil got to you, your flesh is too strong, you have a bad spirit. You'll notice I didn't mention anything from the Bible necessarily. All of this stuff is just worker commandments. They have verses that they can duct tape together to make some sort of theology to back their case, but by and large, verses are rarely ever brought up. Sometimes they'll say one. They'll say something about being unequally yoked or something like that. They'll talk about modesty. They'll talk about all kinds of things. They'll talk about the verses that they can squeeze into that theology. They won't talk about any of the ones that contradict it, of course. But none of this really has to do with the Bible. This just has to do with worker authority. They don't really talk in terms of evil a whole lot, but they do talk in terms of worldly. The main point is to be different than the world. That's the main point. We want to stand out. We want to be in the world, but not of the world. The workers really want their people to stand out. And most of the time, that's just defined by not being worldly. The funny thing about all of the things I listed is that 2x2s will justify all of them. And they'll equivocate and they'll say, well, they're not actually rules, but if you have the right spirit, if you're humble, if you have the spirit of a lamb, the spirit of a child, if you're willing to follow, then you'll just do these things. You don't need to be told to do them. You can just do them. And that's a quick, easy way to diminish anybody who leaves as well. I would love to ask these people sometimes, if you don't have to do it, then why do you do it? That's where you get the equivocation of, well, I actually like it. But in reality, they don't like it a lot of times. Women don't like those hairdos. Women don't like the skirts, like I mentioned before. All of them know that if they broke those rules, they wouldn't be able to take part anymore. They would lose fellowship. They would lose respect to the families. They'd lose respect to the workers, worst of all. And they'd have to gain it back through repentance or something, or just getting it right again, having a little discussion with the workers, having a little talk, having a little visit. Everything's solved with a visit. And that's embarrassing and nobody wants that. So people just keep following the rules. All the things I talked about up until now are things that are demanded by the workers. They're behaviors that are performed because they have to be, to stay in good standing with your friends, with your family, with the workers, to show that you're professing, to show that you've been changed, to show that you have the second nature, to show that you have the right spirit. You have to behave a certain way so that everybody knows it. And they'll say it's because you have a right spirit. They'll attribute it to a spirit. But in reality, it's just a display. It's a role you're playing, really. The other parts of professing behavior are all the things that people do and ways people act, not because they've been told to do that, but because they've done all the other things. Living and acting a certain way and holding yourself down the way that I've talked about everyone doing creates weird behaviors, creates behaviors that don't really make any sense and don't even make sense to anybody within the 2x2s if they had to explain it, but they typically don't have to explain it because they surround themselves by people who reinforce them. This whole series has essentially been about this idea that when you control your emotions, control your thoughts, and control all the information you take in, your behavior ends up a certain way, a certain repeatable way that you'll even repeat on purpose, whether it makes any sense or not. One of the strange behaviors that professing people do is an unnatural set of emotions, displaying that unnatural set of emotions and displaying them very publicly. I talked about the fake emotion in my emotions video. The strange emotion often leads, especially women, to what they call princess voice or fundy voice, which is just talking strangely, talking in a very unnatural way because it feels like the right thing to do. Talking very unsure, projecting a timidness, which is supposed to be humility. But it's good enough. It works well enough. The behavior is correct enough that it can pass as humility and having the right spirit. Faking your emotions leads to an emotional unavailability. We don't connect emotionally, and we hold each other at arm's length because we don't want to get too close to touching our natural self. We don't want to be worldly, but we also don't want to be ourselves. Remember, our enemy is the world, the flesh, and the devil. Of course, we don't want to be worldly, and we have to display at every moment that we're not worldly through our dress and through our talk and things. But we don't connect emotionally either because to do so would be to connect to ourselves. We're constantly taught not to do that, and so we avoid it. We're taught explicitly not to do it, but we implicitly do it as well. Good friends and open families can avoid this. Not all can, though. A lot of people have very disconnected lives, and when they come out of meetings, when they leave the 2x2s and stop professing, it takes a lot of therapy and a lot of patience with themselves to connect to themselves enough to even understand what they want and what they like, and how to present themselves to the world. I mentioned the emotional displays in meetings. There's a lot of emotional displays that don't make any sense. Behavior that's very strange. I also talked about funerals. How funerals aren't really that sad because we know that the person went to heaven. We're supposed to have joy at the funeral. Doesn't mean people don't cry now and then, but the overall feeling of a funeral is a display of joy and fellowship. There's other times where they display the wrong emotions as well. Right now there's a major CSA scandal going on among the 2x2s. There's a lot of sadness in meeting over that. There's a lot of performative emotion about this situation. But all of it is about that the situation is happening to them. None of it is about the victims. None of it. I've called into and listened to many meetings and listened to many workers over the last year, and it's been 2 convention seasons now as I'm recording this. I've heard almost nothing spoken about the victims and sadness toward the victims. All of the sadness, all of the performative emotion, the performative sadness, a little bit of anger here and there, but mostly feeling bad for themselves and saying so publicly and stating so. All of that has to do with feeling bad that this is happening to them. They feel attacked and they're going to tell you about it. It's a very strange way to manipulate your own emotions performatively, to view yourself as the victim to the point that you ignore the cries of victims. That's a thought control technique as well. 2x2s do a lot of thought stopping and thought control, and I've talked a lot about that already. But rationalizing bad behavior is one of those things. And to do so publicly, and then to hold people accountable who don't do that, that's a problem. And that is a behavioral manipulation. I have heard a few people stand up in their testimonies, say in convention meetings, and talk about the problem in a very real, honest way. I happen to know that those people were told not to speak anymore. Again, that's not a teaching by the workers, but it's behavioral manipulation to the fullest degree. Professing people also limit how they learn. I talked about this in the information podcast, about reclaiming information. They limit their own education, sometimes don't even go to school because they're told not to, but never told explicitly not to. They just know that that's the expectation. I know many people who never went to college, not because anybody told them not to. In fact, I know people who had educated parents, but didn't go to college themselves because they just felt convicted, quote unquote, finger quotes in the air, that they shouldn't do that it didn't seem right for the kingdom, quote unquote. Some of those people went in the ministry, some didn't, some just raised children. And later in life, through faith crises, realized that they'd limited themselves. They'd limited their own behavior because they just felt it was the right thing to do. They'd limited their own access to information and learning. Sometimes they limit themselves formally, like not going to school. Sometimes they limit themselves informally, like just not pursuing hobbies, not pursuing interests. I know professing people who've limited their intake of information to the point that they don't think dinosaurs existed. That's a new weird one too, just limiting basic information. and automatically dismissing anything that doesn't align with their own belief system. All of this just amounts to playing a role that you know will make the workers happy, that will make professing people like you, that will get good reviews from the people around you, your support system, that will cause people in your support system to say that you have a good spirit and a right spirit. The end point of limiting your behaviors, of course, is to call everything you do your choice, even if it's not. And that is formalized. And we tell that to people. We say, this person made their choice to serve God. They exhibited the right behavior. Did they really make that choice? It looks like they did, and that's what matters. All of this manipulation of behavior really amounts to penalizing somebody for being a person because the flesh is the enemy. And if you do it enough, if you're raised in it, you start believing it. You don't start believing it, you believe it from the time you're young. Most people in meetings have been going to meetings since they were born, so they don't know another way. There aren't that many converts, for reasons that should be obvious. So the strange part about this is that this manipulated service, this manipulated behavior, actually comes across very honestly. The people in it really do believe that they're doing what they want to do, that they're doing the right thing especially. That's the most important. But they can also manipulate themselves into believing they want to. And I was one of these people. I believe I was honest, but I was never authentic. And I think that's the closest I can get to summarizing the whole 2x2 experience. Honest, but never authentic. And as such, it's been really interesting to me to watch people leave meetings and come to my support group and talk about trying to find themselves and really struggling with it. Because we're used to being what we think of as honest, but so inauthentic that actually it's not honest. You could say that. But mostly just confused. So many people leave meetings and have somewhat of a midlife crisis, I would say, regardless of what age they leave. The experience in their teens and 20s is not that dissimilar from people who leave in their 50s and 60s. The same type of things happen. They realize they don't even know what their interests are because they've never pursued them. They've only pursued being professing and looking professing. Many, many people get well into adulthood and don't know anything about their own sexuality. They've never explored their gender expression. That sounds really strange to somebody from the outside. From the outside, you would say, well, why didn't they just leave? Why not? Why would you live in a system that doesn't allow you to be authentic to yourself at all? Why would you be disconnected from yourself that much and behave in a way that isn't authentic, that isn't you? It's hard for someone who isn't in it to understand how intense the feelings are when you're born into something, raised in it, and surrounded by it for your entire life. We're born and raised in it, surrounded by it, and eventually all of the love that we receive and all of the acceptance we receive comes essentially as conditions of professing. I think that's what people on the outside don't quite understand. And maybe people on the inside don't understand that either. They think the disapproval they have of people who aren't following all the rules and doing all the things is just showing them expectations, but really it's showing that there's just not the care and love there. Growing up professing is bounded choice, and if you want to know about bounded choice, read up on the work of Janja Lalich. She came up with that phrase, I believe, and it's a true phrase. When you don't have better choices, when you're not aware of other choices because you've been taught from the very, very beginning that the only choice is the choice that you're currently doing, inertia is very strong. You're going to do what you did yesterday. Changing is the hard part. It always cracks me up when people say, oh, they took the easy way out and they left meetings. No, they didn't. That was the hardest thing they've ever done. That's nearly universal. When people leave meetings, they're not taking the easy way out. They're doing the most difficult thing they've ever done, trying to connect with themselves and trying to connect with what they believe is truth. And in many cases, it takes years and years to do this. There are people who have left situations that are extremely abusive, and it's taken a very long time and all of the tenacity they can muster to do it because they didn't have a support system outside. I hope that's changing, and I think it is, but a lot of people carry those scars. I really think one of the worst forms of gaslighting is when professing people who would treat you like garbage if you stepped out of line tell you that all of this is a choice. Staying in is a choice, leaving is a choice. It doesn't really feel like a choice when all the love, respect, care, and support you get are premised entirely on how you're acting, and if you're acting professing enough, if you're doing all the right things, acting the right way, and looking the part. That's a bounded choice. That doesn't feel like a choice. It's all extremely manipulative. It takes a lot of tenacity and maturity and will to break free from that. It's very difficult and very lonely. My own personal adventure now is just learning more about this, learning more about myself, but learning conceptually about locus of control and learning how to make that an internal thing. The control comes from me on the inside. I was turned against myself too because I was raised going to meetings. Everybody who goes to meetings is told not to listen to themselves because the flesh is evil. So having an internal locus of control, as opposed to an external one, which is just the workers, is a huge adjustment. People who've been outside for years and years still have that pull. They still feel like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. Doing simple things like putting on jewelry, cutting your hair a certain way, or something like exploring sexuality, all of those things all feel terribly unnatural to somebody who's never had the option. Doing worldly things is hard because you feel more like an outsider now. You never really feel like one of the people in the world. Maybe you do eventually, but it takes a long time. You feel like an outsider in both cases. You're not welcome in meetings because you're not acting right, and you'd have to change a lot to go back. But out in the outer world, you're different there too. You don't quite act like they do. You don't quite act like the people around you. People feel very uncomfortable just doing normal things. Therapy helps with this. And if not therapy, just finding like-minded people. And that's what I've been trying to do. I've done both. I've done therapy as myself and with my wife. And we've tried to build some community outside. Thankfully, that community is growing quite a bit and is made up of a lot of professing people, ex-professing people, I should say. Some of the most popular posts in our X2x2 support group, people saying, hey, I went and got earrings today. I did something to my hair. Check out my tattoo. Who else has tattoos? Check out this outfit I'm wearing that I would never wear otherwise. I'm throwing away my skirts. Does anybody want them? Check it out. I just put up a Christmas tree. People love those posts and they cheer them on because it's somebody who's exploring just a little bit, not doing crazy stuff, just doing little things, trying to be a little bit normal and exploring what they actually like in the world. And what goes along with this is trying to learn how to behave better toward yourself and toward others. Behavior toward yourself, such as better self-talk, just being kind to yourself, not hurting yourself, not manipulating yourself, not beating yourself up when you fail, or feel like you failed, or feel like you just don't fit in. Self-denial isn't a terrible thing, but when you've learned that listening to yourself at all is bad, then self-flagellation seems good, and it's not. Self-denial is not a bad thing, but terrible self-talk is worse, in my opinion. Humility is good, self-hatred is bad. Your behavior toward other people can change too. For one thing, just being more accepting of other people. You don't need to confine people into a very, very tiny little box to accept them as good. You don't have to walk around thinking everyone's going to hell except for yourself. And probably you too, if you make any mistakes. Radical acceptance is an interesting thing to try. It's very difficult for people who come from high control groups. You can allow people to just be themselves and own their own behavior. If that behavior doesn't hinder me, then why am I going to care about it? If it does hinder me, that's a different thing. But most of the time it doesn't. Just understanding that other people's actions and other people's behaviors aren't reflections of how evil and worldly they are. They're just those people expressing themselves. And that opens us up to feeling empathy toward other people and connecting with other people. Not having to constantly fear eternal impact of making the wrong friend can allow you to be friends with people and pursue genuine friendships. You can just do stuff, talk normal, socialize, and never feel penalized like you did before. But you can also set boundaries. You don't have to accept bad behavior based on who people are either. The CSA scandal right now is premised entirely on the fact that people believe that bad behavior done by good people must not be bad. They've decided that certain workers are important, certain friends are important. So the terrible behavior that they've exhibited, there must be some other explanation for it. So they're blaming victims. They're ignoring victims. They're casting victims aside because the behavior doesn't make sense, so they rationalize it based on who they are. If you're not in meetings, you don't have to do that anymore. And I don't have to do that. I don't have to accept terrible, terrible behavior based on who somebody is, based on somebody's title or the authority they think they have. If somebody does a terrible thing, especially an illegal thing, especially an abusive thing, I'm free to call it out and hold them accountable. I hope the law holds people accountable for some of the stuff that's been happening. But even if it doesn't, I can hold them accountable in the sense that I don't have to involve them in my life and I don't have to make them happy ever. I never have to do anything that a worker says if what they say is wrong. I don't have to justify or equivocate terrible, terrible behavior. Part and parcel of that is if I leave, no one can excuse my bad behavior. I have to pay attention to my own behavior, and I have to pay attention to my impact on people. I have to honor my impact on other people. No one will justify my bad behavior based on the fact that I'm a worker or professing. The things I pursue in life, I have to deal with the impacts of those things. I have to make sure that I'm not hurting other people in a way that workers clearly don't think they have to do. Workers and the special friends, the royal friends, clearly don't think anything they do impacts anybody else, and if it does, they don't care. That's not the important part to them. The important part is professing. But when you leave, you don't have that cover anymore. You don't have people covering for you just because of who you are. You have to hold yourself accountable for the actions you take, and you can hold other people accountable for the actions they take. There's a huge, huge freedom in that, and a huge amount of honesty. And it's an adjustment, but it can be done, and it's very freeing. And hey, last but not least, you can swear now. One last note on this series. This video and the next 3 videos you see in the feed equate to the BITE model by Dr. Stephen Hassan. Hassan popularized the BITE model, which is his explanation of high control groups. High control groups can be defined as groups that control your behavior, the information, your thoughts, and your emotions. And these 4 videos are my way of demonstrating that that's true for the 2x2s. I'm not going to get into any further discussion about what defines a high control group or a cult or whether those terms are valid. But I wanted to explore each of those topics individually, just to talk about them a little bit, say some of this stuff out loud. In the notes below, if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see a link to a discussion we had in our X2x2 group with Stephen Hassan. We've made the video public. You can't see anybody else in the group, but you can see the admins and you can see Dr. Stephen Hassan himself. I think it's worth watching that video, and I highly recommend reading Hassan's work. These videos are loosely based on his BITE model. He has much deeper explanations, and his explanations might not even match what I've said in these 4 episodes, but I use them as a starting point for all this thoughts and discussion. So I highly recommend buying his books, reading his stuff, and reading books by the other person I mentioned, Dr. Janja Lalich. Both of them have extensive work in high control groups, discussing them, defining them, and helping people understand them. I think the 2x2s qualify as a high control group. I think there's more than enough information to fulfill the criteria of high control group, and I think it needs to be talked about. I've never told anybody to leave the 2x2s, but I think that it's good to be at least intellectually honest about the way the group operates, in the same way that anybody should honestly look at any group they're part of. I recommend holding the BITE model up to anything you do, any group you're in, whether it be politics, job, even just a friend group, a family structure, or a religion. I think it's a valuable model, and I think Stephen Hassan's done a great job of breaking it down. So I recommend finding all that stuff. Again, check the comments below this episode if you're on YouTube, and you'll see links to some of this information. That's going to do it for now. I hope you enjoyed this little series. I'm going to move on to some other things now. If you're out of the 2x2s, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope some of this was affirming. Maybe it even helped you clarify in your own mind how you feel about things, as far as your upbringing and your belief system in the past. If you're still in the 2x2s and you're listening to this, first of all, thanks for listening all the way through. I'm impressed if you made it this far. And like I say, I would never tell anybody to leave, but I think it's worth looking at some of these models for high control groups and thinking maybe there could be some improvements made. Maybe a little more accountability, maybe a little more honesty, just intellectual honesty, even just with yourself. You can't always control everybody else. As we've seen over the last couple of years, many groups, even outside groups, have come and tried to guide the overseers, and the overseers refuse to take any guidance whatsoever. But maybe in your own life you can. Maybe some of this still resonates with you. If you're still going to meetings, it's worth going through all the criteria in the BITE model and considering whether any of it's having a detrimental effect on your life. Does it feel good? Does it feel honest? That's up to you, but it's worth thinking about, it's worth talking about with those around you. It's worth considering, because the downside of high control groups can be very harmful and tragic, in fact, and we've seen that over the last few years. It's always worth taking an honest look at the impacts you have on people and the organizations have on you. And if you plan on leaving, you'll know others have done the same thing. And it was difficult, but they did it, and I think they were happy they did it. I hope you've enjoyed all this. Thanks so much for listening to it. Feel free to leave any questions or comments below. And I'll see you next time.